Hello and welcome. I am honored and delighted to be giving this plenary talk today at the SPIE Optical Metrology meeting. I've been coming to this meeting for many years to reconnect with friends and colleagues and to hear about the latest advances in optics. Thinking back over the years of the great talks that I've heard, it hasn't always been obvious which new ideas would capture the imagination of our community and ultimately be accepted by industry as useful. We have this idea as scientists and engineers that our technical work will be appreciated purely on its merits and scientific foundations, but it's not always so simple. It can be a lot more complicated and interesting than that. What I'd like to do today is to explore some of the other factors related to technology adoption, including organizational culture, professional reward systems, personal goals, and so forth. This will be a pretty informal talk. I hope you enjoy it, you find it interesting and useful, and I really look forward to your comments when we're done. And with that, let's get started. I'm going to begin with the statement that optical metrology is perfect for manufacturing. And why is that? Well, it's because it's fast, it's flexible, it's non-contact, and you get lots and lots of data, which is very important for trends like Industry 4.0. So given these advantages, you would expect manufacturers to be clamoring to include optical metrology into their quality control and development processes. And that is happening, but it's not always happening as quickly as we would like. So then the question comes up, well, what's the holdup? Is it a technical issue? Is it the kind of surfaces that you can look at? Is it the environmental control that you have to have in order to use sensitive optical methods? Perhaps it's the calibration framework. And the answer is it is all of those things, but that's not the whole story. And to think about this a little bit further, I'd like to first take you to San Diego. This is the balcony of the convention center in San Diego a couple years ago at the SPIE annual meeting. A couple things to notice here at this members reception. There's a beautiful sunset over the marina, but more importantly, there are lots of people here representing every aspect of the innovation chain. There are scientists, there are engineers, there are students, there are people looking for solutions that are being provided by engineers and scientists. So what's the message? Well, the message here is that innovation is a social activity. It's not just about the technology. We come from all over the world, and different parts of the world have different customs and cultures. We might speak different languages. We might have grown up in an environment that gives us a different perspective on how new technologies might affect our lives. Our work environments can also be very different, whether we're from academia or from private enterprise, a national lab, how the hierarchy works, how you get rewarded and recognized for the work that you do. That can vary a lot from place to place. So the message here is that technology adoption is not just about science. It's also about culture, reward system, and personal goals. This whole question of technology adoption is an active research topic. So a lot of people write research papers about this, and they perform studies, and they get funding, and they have projects to try and understand what it is that causes people to accept or not accept new technology. From one of these papers, I found the following quote, which I quite like, so I'll just read it. When considering technology adoption, culture influences individuals' thinking and attitudes, level of innovativeness, and willingness to accept uncertainties. And the key thing here, of course, is that culture includes professional environments. There are advanced models for technology adoption. If you look into this, it's pretty impressive. This is from that paper on cultural values and technology adoption. And you can see things that like indulgence constraint index, uncertainty avoidance index. These things are all quantified and used in models to try and understand how technology is adopted in various cultures. It's possible that these types of studies have maybe gotten too far. Combinations of psychological and information science theories have almost reached a theoretical saturation point. So this is from one of those research papers. So I'm not going to go much further into the formal academic topic of technology adoption. In this presentation, what I'd like to do is take a more qualitative approach. In this informal approach, we'll first look at optical metrology and how it fits into manufacturing, And then to tackle this issue of technology adoption, we'll consult some famous philosophers like Aristotle and the Little Prince. Then we'll take a trip to Africa and we'll visit the pyramids and the hierarchy of needs. And then we'll come back to the United Kingdom and have some hot chocolate. We'll take some pictures with some cell phones. And then finally, to get a better understanding of how to be effective in the virtual world, we'll consult some K-pop artists. Optics has long supported precision manufacturing, so they're optical tools that have been around for quite a while. Interferometers have also been around for a long time. Here's an interferometric comparator from the 19th century. And here's a light box, which is still pretty common in a lot of optic shops around the world. Interferometers are common in precision positioning. Here are a couple of examples from photolithography showing some exotic glass structures. These are designed to measure stage positions with better than a nanometer resolution while the stages are moving at greater than a meter per second. Really quite remarkable. Interferometers are also used in surface form and texture measurement. They dominate really the optical testing industry of lenses and mirrors. Optical inspection for semiconductor manufacturing is well established for many years now. So semiconductors are made with optics and they're also examined with optics. The range of applications is increasing. So these days people are doing interferometry on objects that were not considered to be accessible to interferometry not so long ago, like these machine metal parts or this diesel fuel injector on the right. There's some emerging applications in consumer electronics. This is really fun stuff because there are a lot of exotic materials and optical designs in augmented and mixed reality, and this is a fun area for people that are interested in optical metrology. So, optical metrology clearly has a role to play in Industry 4.0, and one can summarize this by saying a data-driven manufacturing relies on continuous digital information from interconnected metrology equipment. That's one of the definitions of Industry 4.0. And that means it's perfect for optics. So it would seem like it was like a done deal. But there are skeptics, so the results don't always meet expectations. If, for example, you take this interferometry picture on the left-hand side, you see a wealth of detail, but what can be sometimes surprising is that that detail has a declining surface height value as you go to higher spatial frequencies. So what does this mean? It means that the closer together surface features are, the smaller they appear in relative height with respect to each other. And as optical people, we understand why this is. It's not too surprising, but if you've used a stylus tool all your life, this might be a little bit disturbing or at least unexpected. Other things that can happen if you have a surface that's got sharp edges or discontinuities, it's not that unusual with an optical system to get a measurement that looks like this with these kinds of overshoots, sometimes called bat wings. So experts have looked at this, and some have declared that clearly these instruments are incapable of measuring the profile around the maximum gradient. This is an actual quote out of a research paper. Here's another one from a different paper. The technology fundamentally fails at irregular topographic features. So this is very disturbing for someone who is in the business of inventing new instruments and trying to sell them. So what can you do about this? Because this is not really an unexpected thing for us as optical engineers. The thing to do is to work with an applications engineer who understands how the instrument works and how it responds, and design your application accordingly to try and avoid these errors. The difficulty is that even if you've designed your application so you're not seeing those crazy bat wings, the damage may already be done. The confidence is lost in the metrology, particularly if the error you're seeing is something that's unfamiliar because you haven't used this kind of technology before. Confidence in metrology is not just an issue with optical instruments. Frankly, as an optical guy, I don't quite trust stylus instruments. This whole idea of using a needle to draw across the surface and get a profile seems to me to be a very good way to mark up your part. Like you see here, on a diamond turned surface, there are clearly indications where a contact profiler has been used to try and get a measurement. So how can we trust these results? Just how exact is the stylus instrument? So this brings us to the philosophy part of the talk, wisdom in metrology. According to Aristotle, it is the mark of an educated mind not to seek exactness where only an approximation is possible. So you think this would be the end of the story. After all, this was Aristotle. However, someone who's purchased an instrument might come to the conclusion that it's rubbish and he wants his money back. So that's not really going to settle the story here. We need more. So perhaps the thing to do is to explain uncertainty to our reluctant user, who on the left-hand side says accuracy is critical to my process control. But in response, the instrument maker, who is also an expert in uncertainty, says, well, no, we qualify our instruments and specify uncertainty. So we're all set, right? Well, no. Why would you want to pay money for uncertainty? It doesn't make any sense. I'll pay money for accuracy, but not uncertainty. And this is a great example of the difficulty of communicating when the terminology is not really understood in the same way between two people. What we're talking about here is sometimes referred to as a clash of cultures. So let's take a closer look at this. So communicating across cultural boundaries can be quite difficult, whether it's a geographical boundary or a professional boundary. And to illustrate that, I'm going to show this picture of the Turkish astronomer who in 1909 discovered the asteroid B612. Now the asteroid B612, of course, is where the Little Prince lives with his two active volcanoes, his one dormant volcano, a rose and a sheep. Now the story goes that this astronomer went to an important meeting and he showed all of his results from his great discovery, but no one believed him. And they didn't believe him because of the way that he was dressed. Now, some years later, in 1920, fashions had changed in Turkey, and he was able to go back to a European astronomy meeting. He presented exactly the same talk with exactly the same results, but now, because of the way he was dressed, everyone believed him. Now, this is a story out of a children's book, but I've actually lived this in person. This is me teaching physics in Burkina Faso in 1985. So in my younger days, I spent quite a lot of time in educational development in Africa. And I can tell you that communicating what I was trying to do to the students there was not always so easy because of the many cultural boundaries that were in place, both geographical and professional. In this picture, which was taken in Ouidah in Benin, the physics teacher on my right is wearing clothes that probably I should be wearing, and I'm wearing clothes that probably he should be wearing. And what we're trying to do here, of course, is to bridge that cultural divide. And we're doing that because we're trying to figure out a way to teach physics as effectively as possible in an environment which is very different from the environment that we grow up in the United States and in Europe and other parts of the world. So the question is, what would be the most effective way to teach physics in this kind of environment? How to make this most relevant to students who are growing up in West Africa? Well, one thing we could do is we could consult a textbook. And when I was working in educational development in the 1980s and 1990s, pretty much all of the textbooks were imported from someplace else. So you had textbook figures like this, someone skiing down a mountain slope, and someone riding on a roller coaster to help students understand vector forces. Neither one of these, particularly at that time, was that relevant to the experience of people living in Africa. As we travel the world, it's not surprising that there can be these big cultural differences and differences in physical environments, but research environments can also be just as different. Take a look at the semiconductor clean room and then compare that with a graduate student lab here with a diamond turning machine that's running and producing some kind of a metal part, and the interference microscope sitting on a wooden table, and the boombox in the corner playing rock and roll music. Not quite the semiconductor clean room that we see over here on the left-hand side. Even the way that we dress can be very different. You know, in the work environment, the semiconductor clean room, you might be wearing a bunny suit, whereas in the manufacturing facility, you might be wearing overalls. And these differences can be just as profound as our Turkish astronomer with his Turkish clothes in terms of how we react to someone who's proposing to us a new idea or new technology. So these are the kind of cultural things, both professional and geographical, that are important. But there are other factors having to do with professional environments that we need to take a look at. To explore these other factors which are related to reward systems, I'd like to take you to a different part of Africa, to the pyramids, and ask the question, what motivates people and organizations? So it's clear that environments impact our motivations and actions, and this has been studied extensively. And one of the more popular models that's been around for quite a while is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this hierarchy of needs is in the shape of a pyramid, hence the pyramids. And it starts with the foundation. The foundation is food and shelter. If you don't have these, then there's not much point in doing anything else. Once you have sufficient food and shelter, you start thinking about your own safety and security and putting a lock on the door, maybe to protect your food and shelter. Once you have these, then you look towards your family and your community for a sense of belonging, your friendships. These types of relationships become very important after you've satisfied these basic needs. Now, how does the community, how do your friends and your family think about you? That affects your self-esteem, whether you're highly regarded by the community and respected. And if you've achieved all of these goals, then finally you have self-actualization. And this is the desire to take your gifts, your creativity and your intelligence and your capabilities and use them to the fullest extent possible. That's self-actualization. So this is the hierarchy of needs. So arguably everybody has these. And the difference is how these are fulfilled in your environment. So let's take a look at the example of someone working in academia, an academic. What motivates them and what becomes their primary focus of life? Well, it's very clear. It's research papers. But how do research papers satisfy this hierarchy of needs? Well, fundamentally, starting with this pyramid at the bottom, you need project funding. And to get project funding, you likely have to have a publication record to prove that you will use this project funding responsibly and creatively. Once you have that, you start to think about your own safety and security and the security of your group, and that becomes this question of tenure, so that you can be sure that you have the time going forward to work on your projects. And what about that research group? Well, that's a sense of belonging. You want to take pictures of all the smiling students you have and associate faculty members and put them at the end of your PowerPoint presentation. And that also relates to recognition by peers. You would like other folks to look at your ResearchGate page and admire the citations that you've received and all of the papers that you've published and how well regarded they are. Finally, of course, there's this sense of achievement. And there's quite a sense of achievement by having a very well established and highly regarded publication record, particularly in academia. What about the instrument maker? Is an instrument maker who's maybe working in private enterprise, are they as concerned about a publication record? Well, probably not. What are they concerned about? Well, they're concerned about profit. And why? How does this help with the hierarchy of needs? Well, fundamentally, at the base of the pyramid, you have incomes and staff salaries. You need to be able to meet payroll. You need to keep the lights on, pay for facilities, and pay for taxes. If you have that, then the next concern is investing in R&D so that you can keep your edge in a competitive marketplace. You'll find in private enterprise there's a lot of emphasis on teamwork, that people are supposed to work together, not only for the effective operation of the company, but also to have that sense of belonging within the company to a team of people that are working towards a common goal. And then how do you measure your esteem? How do you determine whether or not you're doing a good job? Well, part of that might be a high stock price. If you own the business, as an individual, you might be looking for a bonus or some other recognition that has a monetary value attached to it. And then finally, and I can't stress how important this is for people that work in industry, pride in a great product. This is really, really important. It's almost more important than everything else at the end of the day. People like to feel like they've done a good job and that they've produced a product that solves people's problems and addresses the needs of manufacturing in the context of what we're talking about today. So let's try something a little bit more challenging. What about a standards committee member? I'm talking about the ISO standards or national standards. What are these people doing here? How does this work satisfy their hierarchy of needs? And the simple answer is influence. You have some impact or influence on what these standards look like. And that can be important for a number of reasons. If you work for a national lab or you provide calibration services, this is your bread and butter. This is your food and shelter. But you also might be interested for the purposes of best practice guidance. This is the safety and security part. For an instrument maker, you want to make sure that your instruments are used properly and that people have got the right guidance from the standards. And then next, and this is very important, is the community of experts. These people are all very experienced. They've been involved in technology for many, many years. You've got some common interests. They're from all over the world. It's really great to work on a standards committee from that perspective. And if you do a nice job, there's recognition for your good work. And finally, there's a lot of pride in getting it done right. When we look at how people provide metrology advice, it's going to be different depending on how we've satisfied our hierarchy of needs. For example, the instrument vendor is going to be telling you that everything works perfectly. There are no issues with this instrument over here on the right, so just please buy it. But the academic is going to say, oh no, this is a mysterious and complicated instrument. You need to fund my research so that I can write some papers and build my group. And finally, the standards expert is going to insist that this thing is useless without a calibration framework that they've been working on. So what is a user to do with this conflicting advice? Well, they might come to the following conclusion. I'll just go back to what I'm used to. I won't worry about trying to adopt a new technology. I will use the technology I've been using for years that's already well established and written into the company guidelines on how to satisfy calibration requirements. So what motivates the metrology user? This, after all, is the person we're trying to help. What is their perspective on all this? To understand the user perspective, the first thing we need to do is to try and find out what it is that they're trying to get done. What is the job that needs to be done? This is something that many people have been writing about in recent times. It's been kind of a revolution in marketing and product development. To get a handle on this, I'd like to take you to the United Kingdom and offer you hot chocolate. This is one of my favorite places to visit in Nottingham. It's a place called Coco Tang. It's a coffee and hot chocolate store. They sell some other things too. But you know, you can make coffee and hot chocolate at home. So why bother going out all the time? Well, it's because when you're there, you're surrounded by an environment that is actually quite pleasant. You can sit outside and you can watch your coffee being made, and you can have a conversation with other people. So is this place really selling coffee? It is one of the things they're selling, but what they're selling really is an experience. In a similar way, when we look at this fancy coherence scanning interferometer, we realize that people are not using this thing because they like interferometry. It's not really a coherence scanning interferometer. What is it? Well, it's a way for end users to make money from improved manufacturing. That's the job that they need to get done. They don't really need to do interferometry. They need to build a product of some kind. Identifying the customer job is not always easy. The customer might not even know what it is themselves. For example, the customer might tell you, or the user might tell you, well, I want to make the world's best 35mm film camera, so please help me do that. But that's not really their business, is it? Their business is selling a way to share experiences and memories. And recognizing that can have a big influence on the decisions that are made regarding what to manufacture and how. Assuming that our camera maker has wisely decided to invest in smartphone cameras instead of 35mm cameras, how are those portable device cameras made? Well, they have a lens assembly. The lens assembly involves these little plastic lenses that are injection molded. And the quality of those injection molded lenses depends greatly on the mold pins. And you can measure those for aspheric form by interferometry. You can also measure the individual lenses for quality control. And this is definitely important, but it's not the whole story. So it's just as critical, the molding process that goes into making these lenses and the lens alignment. So it may be that to satisfy the manufacturing requirements of the lens maker, we need to pay just as much attention to the various features that are put on the lenses to allow these lenses to be dropped together and aligned mechanically. And that's a somewhat different problem. It can also be that in addition to having the mold pins properly shaped, they need to be positioned in a pulled plate so that when you put the entire assembly together and you do the injection molding, everything is properly aligned. So these are things that you need to find out about the job that needs to be done at your lens manufacturing site. Sometimes the user job to be done isn't directly related to the product that they are trying to make. It might be in the development of an optical metrology solution to replace a traditional one. So for example, you might have an optical instrument and you would like to show that it provides the same data, but with greater density and higher speed and non-contact and so forth, to a traditional stylus measurement that maybe is already written into a process control regulation at an organization. So to do this demonstration, you can take a variety of specimens that have known contours. You could measure it on the stylus tool, and you could measure it on the optical instrument, and you can show agreement. So we have done this. We've published data of this kind. So you can see here what we would consider to be very close agreement between the stylus and optical instruments. So this should settle the issue. The story here is we showed this to a customer, and they looked at it and they said, well, why are these two plots so different? So what we failed to do was to recognize that in order to demonstrate compliance or agreement between these instruments, you have to, of course, include the measurement uncertainty and show that the uncertainties of measurement overlaps. That's a much more detailed job. Closing the uncertainty gap between new optical methods and traditional stylus solutions is not an easy task. Unfortunately, some organizations have picked this up and are doing this work. For example, the manufacturing metrology team at the University of Nottingham has done a very detailed study on the influence factors and sources of uncertainty for stylus and optical tools using a series of standard specimens. And this is exactly the kind of thing that needs to be done in order to satisfy the requirements of someone in an organization that needs to demonstrate that the new optical solution is going to provide reliable results that make sense in comparison with what's been done traditionally. So now with the uncertainty of measurement under control, what else can you do with this optical tool? So here's a little quiz. Suppose we have two results, A and B, both of which were obtained with an optical instrument. So which one do you like better, A or B? I'm going to guess, since I can't see the show of hands, is that B would be the preferred result of the optical measurement. Except that I haven't told you anything about which result has the better uncertainty. So what's the message here? Well, the message here is that it isn't always about the accuracy of measurement. That's where you have to understand what actually needs to be done for the measurement. Sometimes what is needed is not better accuracy, but more data more easily, just for 3D visualization. So in this example, we have the surface of a valve seat, and what we need to determine is whether or not this valve seat has been damaged. And you can figure that out even without any numbers on the graphs. I took all the numbers off. But nonetheless, you could see on the right-hand side, something is not quite right with this valve seat. So here, the more important thing is to get enough data that we can visualize what is happening with this part. So believe it or not, it took us a lot of years to realize that sometimes the most important thing is just to get data, even if we're not quite sure what the uncertainty is. And now interferometers can measure almost anything. So this is an additively manufactured part. So we've made changes in our instruments so it's much easier to collect data, even if we're not quite sure what the accuracy of the result is. At least you have something you can look at. Here you see all of the detail of an additively manufactured surface. This is in true color, and it does have a height range of 150 microns. And this is very, very important for getting at least a qualitative feel for the manufacturing process. Sometimes, in spite of your best efforts, you end up coming up with a great solution to a problem that didn't actually exist. So a number of years ago, someone came to us with the problem of how do you keep the lenses aligned in a projection optic for photolithography. There are dozens of elements. They have to be precisely aligned. You need sensors to know where these lenses are to a fraction of a nanometer, and the sensors have to be passive. It's a really difficult problem to solve, and we found a solution in this fiber-coupled interferometer with remote sensors, completely passive, up to 64 of them, measurement resolution to 10 picometers, less than a nanometer per day of measurement drift. Really a great solution, but it turns out it wasn't actually a problem. There are other ways to do this. So then we had a solution in search of a problem. After looking around to try and find an application for this extraordinary sensor, we found one in synchrotrons. There are actually quite a few synchrotron facilities. These are these big X-ray machines as large as a small town in some cases. And they have X-ray beams that have to be precisely focused. And that involves bimorph mirrors, involves flexible mirrors and actuators that are continuously adjusting their shape so that you can get the proper focus for the X-ray beam. And it turns out these sensors are ideal for monitoring the shape of that mirror in real time without interrupting the X-ray beam in a servo control system which is closed loop. So this has been really fun for us. So this is a story with a happy ending, but of course you really don't want to do things this way. You don't want to develop a solution and go try and find a problem. So with these lessons learned, what is Zygo doing to better connect to customer needs? Well, as a company working in the private sector, we follow the first rule of business. So what is the first rule of business? Well, here's one way to frame it. No one will pay you to do what you want to do. They will pay you to do what they need to have done. This is a quote from Frank D'Amato. Frank was kind of my mentor at PerkinElmer in applied optics in an industrial setting after I had spent some time doing basic research in an academic environment where the rules are very much different. I had proposed a project to the company that I felt had intrinsic intellectual value related to optical feedback and semiconductor lasers, and I did not get that project approved. So I was complaining about this one day, and Frank explained to me this simple first rule of business. And it was, I have to admit, it was a complete revelation to me. I'd never really thought about it from this perspective before, but it's absolutely true. So no one's going to pay you to do what you want to do. They will pay you to do what they need to have done. If you're lucky, those two things coincide, but this is actually the first rule of business. So keeping this in mind, how do we find out what people need to have done, what they will pay for? So one of the things that we've done in recent years is we've created these cross-disciplinary product-focused teams. What's a product-focused team? Well, a product-focused team is comprised of applications engineers, sales staff, people that work in procurement even, and of course our optical engineers and research scientists. And everyone works together to try and identify exactly what it is that will help benefit our users the most. And that's how we sort projects and get them done. Another thing that we're doing is we're leveraging collaborations with institutes and universities around the world, also influential adopters in the customer community, to try and get a better handle on what needs to be done and what will be most effective as a new innovation. We're also engaged with the larger optics and engineering community. We write papers, we go to conferences, we're active in professional organizations from the OSA to the SPIE, USPIN, and so forth. And we try and support the kinds of activities that go on that help with the social aspects of optical metrology development, as well as the technical ones. This raises the question, of course, of what to do with customer engagement when there's a pandemic. Perhaps we should just stay home and wait. When this whole thing started, we didn't know how long it was going to last, so this was a serious proposal. So we looked around for some inspiration, and I found some, at least for myself, in Bangtan Sonyeondan. This is BTS. They're bulletproof, perhaps the most successful and influential K-pop band ever. And they're so successful not only because of their music, but by their mastery of social media and using digital communications globally. This is from a concert that they did in 2020. They couldn't tour because of the pandemic, so they did a live internet concert with paying participants, and close to 1 million people viewed this concert live. You can see in the back there what looks like the world's largest Zoom meeting. And this was very interactive. You can see there it says, "Did you get our gift?" Things were sent out ahead of time, and the audience and this group of 7 guys worked together to create the atmosphere of a live concert. So one of the things that we learned, one of the takeaways of this last several months, is that connectivity is easier than ever before worldwide. We don't necessarily have to travel as much to communicate with people around the world. And this has been actually quite beneficial. The development of the technologies, but also developing the experience and using these technologies and getting everyone used to the idea that, yeah, we can do this. We can communicate and develop new ideas and innovations remotely. So when the pandemic started, some of our top applications engineers took the equipment home and decided to support our customers directly that way, which worked actually pretty well. We were able to provide uninterrupted support from our high-level applications team remotely, and this type of capability is going to be there even as we start to travel more often. So let's take a pause here for a minute and think about the journey we've been on with optical sociology. We began with optical metrology and its role in manufacturing. We considered the wisdom of Aristotle and of the Little Prince, who introduced us to the whole issue of cross-cultural communications, which we looked at further in Africa with how to teach physics in that environment. We went and looked at the pyramids and thought about the hierarchy of needs, stopped for a cup of hot cocoa in the United Kingdom, and thought about all of the different factors that go into determining what the job is that needs to be done. And finally, we considered K-pop and the role of the virtual environment and our interconnectivity in the virtual world going forward. I'd like to leave you with one final story. This conference ordinarily takes place in Munich. Unfortunately, we couldn't have it in Munich this year, but it does remind me of my very first trip to Germany in 1977. And at that time, I went to Germany, to Mittenwald, to meet with Matthias Klotz. Now, Matthias Klotz was not an optical metrology guy. He was a violin maker, at least he was, in the 17th and 18th centuries. And he founded the violin making school in Mittenwald. So why did I want to see him? The answer is that my brother, Christopher de Groot, was a violin maker, in addition to being a physician. And he wanted to go to Mittenwald at that time because he wanted to get some of the very specialized wood that is used to make violins, particularly the front and backs of the violins. It likely won't be much of a surprise that there are some very specialized carving tools for violin making. But what is less expected is that there are also some specialized metrology tools, like these calipers you see here on the left-hand side. And I'll let you try and guess what that is. If you're thinking, okay, maybe this is a way to measure the thickness of the wood on the front and the back of the violin, well, you're right. But the way that the instrument is actually used in practice is really interesting because it's not just the measurement that is done when you're carving the front and the back of the violin. Also, the violin maker will take that piece of wood and tap on it and listen to it. And by the sound of the resonance of the wood, make a judgment about the uniformity and whether or not to carve more in one area than another, because the wood is really kind of a living medium. So the use of that metrology tool is very, very specialized, something that we won't understand unless we also go through the same type of experience. What does this mean? It means that proposing new metrology for the people that we're trying to help requires understanding and appreciating our customers' skills. And this is something to keep in mind whenever we're thinking about introducing metrology into a production environment. So who knows, maybe in violin making, if we really understand what the needs are here, perhaps someday we can put an interferometer on one of these benches. With these final observations, I'd like to encourage everyone to take a close look at their work from the perspective of optical sociology. Think about the end user for your innovations. What motivates them? How can your creativity and skills help them work their way up their own hierarchy of needs? I really look forward to hearing about your own experiences and ideas about this topic. It remains only for me to thank you on behalf of all the folks at Zygo for listening to this talk. Please do enjoy the conference, listen to as many papers as you possibly can, and I hope to see you sometime soon in person.